Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and those joining online. Good morning to everyone. So, without further ado, we'll sit in silent meditation for a few minutes to settle our minds and our body, bringing our attention to here and now, in this room, at this moment, to one's breath. Next, we will recite the homage to Shakyamuni Buddha. But before doing that, let's take time in visualizing the merit field in front of us in however way you feel comfortable doing it. In a simple way, in a more complex way, whatever suits you, please feel free to do that. Usually here we invoke the presence of Shakyamuni Buddha in the space in front of us, surrounded by his disciples through the ages, to the present time. When we think of them, recall, say in the case of the Buddha Shakyamuni, his initial resolve motivated by great compassion to work for the well-being of all sentient beings. How in the midst of his search he found out nothing short of full awakening until that is achieved. One cannot be of total, full benefit to all sentient beings. Not just in terms of one's compassion, wisdom, tolerance, skillfulness, and all of those qualities, but as well as knowing the sentient beings and be able to relate to them at their own levels by which they could benefit the most, and also being able to benefit them in the truest sense of the word. Likewise, his followers through the ages followed in his footsteps, and many have achieved full awakening like the Buddha himself did, because Buddha's intention is to lead everyone to the same state of full awakening as he himself has done. Think of the journey they took, and think of the stages of qualities that they cultivate while proceeding on the path, and think of the qualities at the state of full awakening. With all of the qualities having reached full potential, and all of the negativities, even to the subtlest stains of them, have been completely removed once forever. Along with this, we think of ourselves being surrounded by fellow sentient beings, all in human forms, in the midst of which each one of us is happily, willingly, enthusiastically leading them in this recitation, cultivation, reflection. While doing so, connect with the sentient beings from the basic levels of our commonality, generating a sense of affinity, to our sense of connectedness, dependence, generating a sense of empathy, growing into compassion, that in turn growing into full-blown bodhicitta. Likewise, think of fellow sentient beings as well undertaking similar reflections, going through the stages of cultivation within them. with these in place. Let's say the homage to Buddha Shakyamuni together.
To the teacher and now transcendent destroyer, the one that's gone, the foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one not to bliss, nor the world's supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans, to you, the Buddha and now transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born in this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies formed supremely fine, crystal motion like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner the best supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme sign, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the false, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foreland, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you, may all beings enjoy this pure land. Banner of a holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalam Niyatayami.
I take refuge until I am awake in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Wherein I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am awake in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am awake in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. Hold in your mind the attitude of bodhicitta that we have just cultivated. Aspiring to attain full awakening for the sake of all sentient beings. And shoring it up with thoughts like why sentient beings without discrimination deserve such a concern, such an attention. Why, towards that end, achieving full awakening is the best choice. And how full awakening is possible and is to be approached. Possible in general and possible to be generated and attained in our own respective mental continuum, despite the fact that it is right now filled with filths, afflictions, obscurations. How, given this reality of what our mental state is, how a state like full awakening can be brought in, can be made possible, can be achieved. And yes, what does it take to become fully awakened from this state of being completely mired in afflictions, delusions, obscurations? Think of what causes us to be in this state. What do we need to change? How is that change possible? How would such a change lead to full awakening? The cognitive obscuration or the obscuration that keeps us from becoming fully awakened is constituted of what we call the subtle latencies or subtle dispositions of the afflictions, including that of the self-grasping. However, when we have to address it, the only way to address it is through the wisdom of understanding emptiness, through the wisdom of understanding the totally opposite of what self-grasping clings onto. Of course, such wisdom developed at such extent, advancement is only capable of affecting, reaching out, and address the cognitive obscuration. Given its subtlety, before we effectively succeed in even touching it and making a dent on it, we have no choice but to first get rid of the seeds of the afflictions. There too, the wisdom of understanding emptiness is a must. Of course, it needs to be. Aided, assisted, complemented by such method paths like bodhicitta, great compassion, all the rest of the six perfections. But ultimately, it falls on the wisdom of understanding emptiness. Of course, of a very strong strength that could only face up to the self-grasping. But before we succeed in doing that, although that's not a must, but for most of us, it will take several lives. If we were to follow just the sutra path, several eons. And for that, we have to first ensure that we succeed in gaining a similar kind of rebirth like we have right now, blessed with all the fortunes and freedom conducive to undertake Dharma practice. There too, what comes in our way of ensuring that is again non-virtuous actions driven by afflictions. Even if it is virtuous action, so long as it is still driven by afflictions, mainly self-grasping attitude, it may land us into upper states of birth. But there too, the risk still lies of slipping back into lower realm of existence. So to ensure our continuous rebirth in such a fortunate state of being, we again have to tackle afflictions. By mitigating them, undermining them, restraining against them so that we do not commit non-virtuous actions. Let alone thinking of our conditions in the future lives. Just think of here and now, in our own respective present life, there too, to ensure that we have joy and happiness, and continue to do so in the single lifetime. There again, what lies in the way is the same afflictions, and our actions and tendencies, habits, fed by them. So we see how the whole trajectory of the path to full awakening is rife with these obstacles, all in one form or the other of the afflictions. Be that afflictions in a manifest form, be afflictions in actions generated by them, be the seeds of afflictions, be the subtle stains left by them. All along it is afflictions, 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 that and this. And let's take time to look at afflictions. By their very nature, are so overpowering and enslaving. And their dangers, problems, sufferings, miseries that they bring upon us are very grave ones, not just temporary, but very grave ones, including plunging us into lower realms of existence with all the sufferings characteristic of them. And such harm that the afflictions bring is not just for a short period, for a limited period. Unless we take efforts, it will just keep on going as it has been up until now. Besides the harms, damage, destructions that the afflictions bring upon us, it's totally unfair because we have been giving residence to it at the core of our heart all along, caring for it. And all it does in return is harm, harm, harm. On top of that, afflictions are such that the more you compromise with them, the more you rely on them, the more you try to be friends with them, the more suffering they bring to us. It's like feeding a poisonous snake with milk every day. The more they are fed, the more stronger they become in their poison, in their capacity to harm. Such is the affliction that we have all along with us. And in many cases, mostly up until now, we have been just blindly following after it, blindly listening to its dictates. Almost like we are under a spell. Now, this cannot continue anymore. We must take efforts, actions against it. If at all there is one object, one authority that we want to rebel against, we can be rightfully rising up against, it's the afflictions. It's by addressing this through and through will lead us to the aspired state of full awakening for the sake of all sentient beings, as well as make our journey smoother, safer, more rewarding. So with these reflections, let's feel more enthused to be in this session, listening and on the drawbacks, pitfalls of afflictions. And through that, maybe we able to not only benefit ourselves, but our fellow sentient beings. At every step of our journey from this time on. Can we have the slides? Okay. So yes, last night we were discussing this, and it is quite uplifting to think of how this journey involves dealing with afflictions, knowing what afflictions does. It's so ensuring and so assuring of being on this path, because the whole focus is on afflictions. If by our own choices we waver off from that in the name of Dharma, it's our own fault. Otherwise, whatever we are doing in the name of Dharma should directly or indirectly be contributing to undermining the afflictions. And that should be very, very uplifting and assuring. And we know from our own experience, unless we think carefully, we know how, with our own trials and tribulations, we know every time we fall down, we know how, looking back, we see an affliction or a team of affliction behind it. And how, despite whatever physical, environmental disasters and problems we are going through, if we could, and there is nothing to avoid it, then even in such situations, if we could really attend to our mind and be able to really kind of make the most of its potential, then even in the midst of such disasters, one will be able to not only withstand it, but also be able to reap meanings out of it, meanings that go far beyond the immediate situation of disaster. So thinking along these lines, as I was saying, this has been my entry point to Buddhism and has really helped me upright all along. I think this is something to be considered and to be brought to mind every day. By the way, one thing to remind each and every one of us is that if we claim ourselves to be Buddhist, that means we have also pledged ourselves to be combating the afflictions at every step. They go in tandem, they go together. Of course, in how we do that, in how we combat the afflictions may take different forms, either that of preparing the ground or kind of augmenting it, or say if we are very fortunate in kind of being close to wrapping up, then kind of concluding it. So it may take different forms in what we do, but if we have that focus and direction in our mind, and kind of every now and then remind ourselves of that purpose behind whatever we do, then yes, those all fall into what you call Dharma practice, otherwise not. Things could look Dharma in the outside, but inside it could be only generating more ego, more anger, more generosity, more generosity of anger, let's call it. Okay. Yeah, we are so generous on these afflictions. We just dole it out every time. What do you need? Anger? Okay. What do you need? Hatred? Okay, here you go. We're so generous in our afflictions. We dole it out like anything. So outwardly it may take different forms, and it must take different forms because of our being at different stages of our capacity. But deep down it should be very, very focused in what we are doing. Otherwise, in the name of Dharma, what we will be doing is taking steps backward every time, backward, more and more backward. Right? That's because we will be strengthening and augmenting our affliction, even justifying it, saying, in the name of Dharma, I could be angry. Whereas that's totally off the mark. Yeah, sometimes people may think, oh, no, sometimes afflictions are needed. And some people may quote evolutionary evidences, evolutionary science and whatnot. Yes, if we only think of very temporary measures, temporary and very limited outlook, then yes, we can say afflictions, there may be occasions when afflictions may be the right thing to resort to. But when we think of long term, particularly when we bring in the Buddhist worldview, then even in the evolutionary sense also, giving into afflictions for immediate short-term benefit is no good for oneself and for others that we are trying to save, protect. So at no given time is affliction an excuse. Because there is always another way, better way, more sustained way to deal with the situation that we thought was only possible to be sorted out through affliction. Because if we take affliction on the path and resort to it, then yes, we lose control over ourselves. We have already given the control to the affliction. The affliction takes charge and directs us. And then there is no guarantee where it's going to go. No predictability. Things can very easily go out of hand. And even if we succeed in gaining what we started out to gain, we will end up not just gaining that, but bringing in more sufferings and more risk and more problems of ourselves and others. So these are things to kind of really think through and carefully. These are not something to be dictated upon and imposed upon, but something that is good to hear about and give thoughts about them, and then come to our own conviction through our own experiences of having met with situation, completely ruined it in one way, looking back and see what went wrong, what could have been done otherwise, and how could anger be replaced by something, how could anger be stopped from kind of stepping in right away without being invited. Very often these afflictions are uninvited guests, uninvited in one way, but in a way invited also because we have nurtured them for so long. So we have given them a blank check or a blank invitation. So that's why they come without asking for permission, like that. So we have to train to kind of minimize that, retract that. Okay, so I think this is quite clear. We have already touched on this in our effort to strengthen our motivation for this session. I mostly drew from this. So here, maybe I could just look at this. Working with afflictions, right? Oh yes, there is a sutra in the sutra where it talks about 6 vehicles, yeah, 6 vehicles, of which the last 3 vehicles are the same. Shravaka vehicle, solitary realizer vehicle, and that of the bodhisattvas. The first 3 are quite telling. They are called human vehicle, Deva vehicle, and Brahma vehicle. And this speaks perfectly well with how we understand Buddhas. Buddhas are there to benefit sentient beings. That's what motivated them in the first place and what carried them through their hardships in the process, and what led them to full awakening, full consummation. And thus, just as we have seen in one of the sutras that we shared earlier, not this time, but earlier at one occasion, several occasions that people also brought it up, where Buddha says that I am who I am because of sentient beings, and that's the whole journey was because of them, that I care to benefit them, and having attained full awakening, all I have to do is just benefit sentient beings. And those of you who claim to be my followers, my disciples, whatnot, should be able to understand that and relate to me accordingly. If you have this partiality of honoring me but looking down upon sentient beings, that's contradictory in your conduct, and that's not going to please me even. Right? So it's quite clear that Buddha should be thinking of not just those who are inclined to attain Sravaka Arhatship or Pratyekbhuta Arhatship or Buddhahood, but what about those who do not have any interest in Dharma? Or those who may have a short-term interest to be born as devas, to be born as humans, but not beyond that, to be born as Brahma, to be born as the Lord of a celestial realm. If that's all they wanted, and they see to be the highest goal possible, and what about them? What does Buddha do? And that speaks very clearly that in the sutra there is mention of human vehicle. For those who are humans and want to be born as humans and have no long-term goal except that they do well as humans and then be born as humans, for them they are taught the human vehicle. That constitutes, say, for those who have a very short-term outlook, just limited to this life, Buddha would definitely wish them to have good one life, be able to live it well without suffering much and bringing sufferings to them and others. And that would be refining the actions of the 3 doers, body, speech and mind, and mitigating the influence of afflictions to the extent possible. They may not be ready to believe that afflictions can be completely rooted out. Right? Yes, there is an existence beyond this life, but in accordance with their inclination, with their capacity of thinking, their talent and faculty, what Buddha would teach is, yes, refine your actions. Right? You cannot do everything. You just, at any given time, you have a choice. You just take one path, but not others. Even if you may miss them, there's no other way. So the better off to do so by refining your actions, which means mitigating the influence of afflictions to the extent possible. That's how you will live well. And then for those who aspire for being born as a Deva, for here the Deva is the Deva of the desire realm, right? Deva of the desire realm, not of the form realm, but of the desire realm. Ours is the most represented realm. So let's cheer up. Ours is the most represented one, which has all the representations. Devas, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, or famished spirits, hell beings, and animals. Pardon? Yeah, in the desire. The desire is the most representative one. That's where we are in. So it has its deva, it has its deva. What do you call? It has its deva share. So to be born as devas within the desire also, if that's what one aspires to, and beyond which one doesn't have any interest and any belief in it, then for them also, Buddha teaches, yes, do the same thing of refining reactions. On top of that, cultivate concentration practices. Oh no, maybe not for the desirarium devas. For them, concentration practice of a great level is not needed. But engage in positivities and engage in positivities, not negativities. What you call confess them, purify the negativities, and engage in positive actions. To be born as humans or as devas in the desirarium in the next life, and engage in positivities. And for those who have no interest beyond this life, Buddha may say, may not insist on saying cultivate virtuous actions. For what? For something beyond, they have no interest. But they could tell, at least while you engage in whatever, don't think of it being virtuous or not. Don't worry about it. But at least make sure that the afflictions have much lesser influence, much lesser say in them. And that's how everything will go well. Your discussions, meetings, workplace, everything will much go well. But and then those who have inclination or desire, longing to be born as Lord of the celestial realms, whatnot, then yes, Buddha would say, yes, if that's what you want, you have to cultivate the causes and conditions. And the primary cause for being born as devas in the form and formless realm is, on top of positive actions, cultivate strong concentration practices, concentration capacities. In a way, their whole karma to be born in them constitutes of this concentration practice. So whatever level of concentration that you develop, they will be born there. So that's in the sutra. And I heard His Holiness the Dalai Lama once referring to this sutra and saying, what I'm proposing here in the name of secular ethics, it's in line with that. People may think that what I'm doing is totally outside of Buddhism, outside of what Buddhas would like to do, but it is in line with that. Because of compassion and caring for whoever it is, believers, non-believers, even problem makers, whatnot. Compassion is what drives one to help them, and the way to do that in this given life, in this given time, is to come up with such program as secular ethics or sea learning in education, where people are made to know themselves more closely inward, their emotions, and increase their emotional literacy, and be able to really recognize emotions within them and outlooks within them, and be able to address and deal with them accordingly. To that extent, they will be much more better off and facilitated in dealing with, in managing their life in a much more meaningful way. So that's what it is. And then I think the rest is quite clear. The first one is from a strictly scriptural parlance, that would be practitioners, if at all, of the low scope. But within that, there's this division of Sofel, So Peba, the main disciple, the main practitioners of that level, and not the main, secondary practitioners. So those whose concern is just within this life would be what we call the secondary practitioners of the lower scope. And then that of the lower scope is the next one, and that of the middling scope is the next one, and then that of the high scope of the Bodhisattvas is the last one. So, in all of this, we see very clearly how affliction has, where affliction is the main target to tackle. Affliction is the one that keeps us from progressing on our path. Okay, so now let's see. So in terms of how to approach our afflictions, we have to identify the afflictions within us. And it takes a skill to identify it. Sometimes we gloss over them so much that, or we go through things so quickly that we don't even see them. We overlook them. We don't even see that there were so many mini steps in between, and where afflictions play a big role in directing our moves. Sometimes when we say, suppose we are here, and we think of something to do at the library, we'll start moving from there. But then, in the meantime, our thoughts kind of take us here and there and here and there and here and there. Sometimes we get completely hijacked and then taken off track, right? Like that. So that's when we pay attention, we'll begin to see it. Otherwise, we will be doing something and totally lost. How in the world I ended up here? I had no idea how I got there, right? And so yet at the same time, every move we made was caused by conditions. So it's so to do a very thorough job of what Buddha asks us to do, if we really want to attain full awakening and realize the highest ideal of long-lasting joy and happiness ourselves, and by which we will be as much capable of benefiting others. To be able to do that, we have to be able to work thoroughly with our afflictions, with our mental states. And to do that, first and foremost, we have to identify them. And that's why in sea learning education, they pay a great emphasis on what they call emotional literacy, beginning with identifying different emotions and separating needs from wants. And boy, that really takes effort, but then once we get a hang on them, it really makes a big difference in identifying where the problem lies, what needs to be done, like that. And then not only seeing them for what they are, we have to know we have to be able to expose them, see them beyond their facade. They all come as something aiding us, like, oh, you need me at this point, right? Without being asked, without being sent an invitation, it will come voluntarily, saying, oh, you need me here. Why don't you take me under your wing? Or why don't you let me take over? That's what afflictions do. But they end up destroying us. So we have to know their destructive nature. And the more we know the destructive nature of them, then we will develop a sense of disgustion, dislike. And afflictions are good to be disliked. Nothing wrong with disliking afflictions. Because which means not giving in to afflictions. We cannot be giving in to afflictions in disliking afflictions. Then we will be liking it in the name of disliking it. So like in the scriptures we say, be angry with anger. That doesn't mean really literally to be angry with anger. Because if we angry with anger, we are embracing anger. Yeah. So knowing the destructive nature. And then once we know the destructive nature of it, it's so good to then know, so important. It might be a natural step to kind of our curiosity as to how in the world this comes about. What can I do? Where can I stop? Where do I have a chance to stop it? Given my capacity at this point, where's the gap that I can step in and then disrupt the flow? So that's how they are generated. What causes them? What is the process of causing them? It's very important. We didn't touch on this last time. We will do this definitely this time. And how they proliferate. In a way, the afflictions, they team up. They team up against us. If we give them a free hand, they will not only invite themselves voluntarily, but invite others with them without knowing who they have under their cloak. Like very often it is anger or it is attachment that generates anger. It's because we have attachment towards some, then we naturally develop anger or dislike towards others. And then generally when we have attachment towards something, then depending on what happens to that being or to that situation, we feel justified to be angry. So they go kind of hand in hand. That's the reason why in many of the scriptures, instead of speaking of ignorance being the root source of sufferings, very often even in the Buddhist scriptures, they identify sepa or craving or desire. I mean, here desire is the afflicted desire, not just desire per se. And they identify that as the source. And they do that within a particular context, saying within this context, with these considerations, we can for now leave aside ignorance and then focus on craving, and then see how it plays a big role in leading to all the sufferings. Which it does. After ignorance, it's a sepa, it's a craving. But then there can be ways of talking of kind of doubling down on the damage and the drawbacks and the pitfalls of craving in such a way that we kind of leave ignorance out of the picture and dwell on it. That's what very often in different contexts it does in the scriptures also. So the main message or point from there is, yes, once we have attachment to one thing, naturally it means dislike or anger towards the other. And likewise, because we have dislike towards the other, whatever happens to them will affect us differently in terms of our attitudes. Whatever affects to our group or the in-group towards which we have attachment, whatever happens to them, we would have this unjustified, unnecessary attitudes of either unrestrained, unjustified pleasure or that of suffering, etc. And then once we know how they are generated, then yes, we have to be equipped with the antidotes. We have to be equipped with antidotes of how to deal with them. And there are a variety of them, many of them, differing in how deep they go in doing the work. And that will also depend on how much oneself is capable of pulling them off. So knowing one's stage in the spiritual practice is very essential, and at the same time kind of keep striving to build on that. Keep striving on building the mindfulness tool, like you call that mindfulness tool. Likewise, we could building on our tool box in terms of how to deal with the afflictions in different situations. So that's what it is. This is something that I have not just come up with by myself. It's even very clearly laid out, even in scriptures also. One particular one I remember is by Asanga in his Abhidhamma Samujjaya, which is more like an encyclopedia in the Tibetan Buddhist world, in the Mahayana Buddhist world. Like, as I have been saying, Buddha Ghosh has been in the Pali tradition. Even in Lamrim, if you pay attention, when it comes to meditation, dealing with the method aspects of paths, aside from, even including Bodhisattva practices, all of those, most that Tsongkhapa draws from is works of Asanga and other masters, but mainly of Asanga. Okay. So I think we have done this in terms of defining affliction, and what it is and what it is not. We will go through it later on. But basically, even this, in the Tibetan, the definition has some connotation of kind of raking up things from the bottom, from deep down, and this having the function of disrupting the peace. Raptu Mashivarcheva. Raptu is an emphatic qualifier, and what it is attached to is its function of Mashivarcheva, disrupting the peace, right? So I think we touched on this last time. This should be fine. Let's move to the next one. Yeah, so quite interesting. This is quite interesting to look at. When the scriptures kind of engage in listing the afflictions, they list in these two categories, one called root afflictions, the other called secondary afflictions. The root cause, the root afflictions usually is listed as 6. If we list as 6, is this slide being made available to people? Oh, okay, yeah. So anyone who is interested could access it from the website. Okay. So when we speak of 6, then we go from 1st to 5. All the rest of the remaining 5 is subsumed in what is called view, just the view. As you can see, in all the remaining ones, irrespective of whether it is spelled out or not, all of them are forms of view, so-called view. I know view is a term that is not that helpful. View almost seems like saying, phew. Phew. I could not come up with a better term. Right? But it has this, but why it is called view, aside from the others are all emotional in nature, all listed under view. The remaining 5, the second half, are cognitive in nature. I was earlier calling it intellectual in nature, intelligence in nature, but intelligence may not be the best word, but it is cognitive in nature. But it has something to do with intelligence. There is some calculation there going there. Whereas in the case of afflictions, it's almost like a blind kind of a lump of emotion. But in the case of the views, it is more like a calculated mental state where it has its own reasonings, logic, although those are, what do you call, not that sound logic, but spurious logic, but nonetheless founded on logic. So when we speak of 6, then the first 5 and the last remaining 5 are summed together as view. If we kind of expand them, then they are also of 5 in nature. In the scriptures, the purpose behind this view being then expanded into this at least 5, although it could be expanded into even more, because even yeah, it could be even expanded into more types, but the scriptures kind of mostly expand them into this fivefold. And they say that the reason to do that is so that one becomes more sophisticated in dealing with the afflictions, right? In dealing with the afflictions, because this remaining five involves intelligence, involves intellect, involves some kind of a intellectual calculation there, and thus many of them are not innate in nature. They are acquired in every respective lifetime, but not carried over, and less and yeah, carried over lifetimes, in the way the innate ones are done. And when we so the interesting thing about this is, we will come to this when we go to the next slides. So for now, understand that these are what is called the 10 or the 6 root afflictions, and the remaining afflictions are called secondary afflictions, although the list of them varies with different scriptures, and whatever list we have in the scriptures are also openly admitted to be not exhaustive, because the most exhaustive list we could come up, not most the most number we can come up of afflictions is 84,000. 84,000. I'm interested in really figuring out and listing it out one day. I hope I will succeed in doing that, because nobody has done it, and it needs to be done. Because it cannot remain like this, like there is, but where? But there is. I found some. I've already started looking into the sources. Found some in some resource where at least the mathematics add up. But now I have to find out the contents. So interesting, and you will get some idea when we go into the secondary afflictions, and we kind of pair them with the root afflictions. Then we will begin to see, maybe that's how you get these many branches out into 84,000. Even 84,000 maybe not that enough. Yeah, but these are what you call these root afflictions. So we will begin to see the relationship between them, and I mean, some ideas we could deduct from that in terms of what they are or not. Okay, so ignorance, attachment, anger, pride, deluded doubt, not just doubt per se. So it's quite telling that doubt itself is not negative. Sometimes we need to have doubt to then progress along the path, positive doubt. But negative doubt or afflicted doubt, in the sense of which tends more to negating things, which tends more to undermining things or negating things, refuting things, rejecting things, those are called afflicted. But doubts, it's a kind of being open to whatever, however things may turn out to be, and approaching it with that kind of a sense of openness and curiosity. But those are positive. Likewise with the view, although I said when we count just the sixth one is view, but technically it should also be afflicted view, not just view per se. I mean, in a way, we all understand view. They can be very wonderful and view, right, of understanding emptiness, understanding subtle dependent origination and whatnot. So view per se is not even an affliction, let alone a root affliction. So the view here is also afflicted view, and all these views are afflicted views. We will begin to see how they are distorted. They are intelligence in nature, or intellectual in nature, or cognitive in nature, but which has gotten the nature of things in a off-kilter way, off-kilter way, or in a skewed way. Okay. So I don't think we need to explain each one of them. This we can recognize. One thing that may be required is ignorance. Ignorance can take place in two forms. One is not knowing, more particularly not knowing what the causes are that leads to happiness, what the causes are that leads to suffering, right? And not knowing how samsara works, what is the way out of it. So basically in the form of not knowing. And additional to that, basically in the form of not knowing on these very crucial topics. But another form of ignorance, which is even more subtle and more important, is that of distorted knowing or misknowing, distorted knowing, which is not merely blank not knowing, blank attitude of blank mental state of not knowing, no idea, but rather having a strong believed idea, which is completely diametrically opposite to the reality. And here comes our complete ignorance of how things exist. We think that things have their own intrinsic nature. That's this form of ignorance, the second form of ignorance. Things lack even the tiniest atom of any intrinsic reality, intrinsic objective reality. But when we hold on to that, when we grasp at that, we approve of that, we adhere to such a view, and that kind of ignorance is a ignorance of the second type, where it takes a graver form of not just not knowing, but completely misknowing it, totally misknowing it. And self-ignorance, self-grasping is in that category. Although self-grasping, the term it is a direct translation for the Tibetan. It needs to be uncoded, but self-grasping itself is not that descriptive. It may even imply like, oh, it means grasping at oneself. I. Not quite that. So this needs to be uncoded and uncoded. And so there's so much to go, so much to do, which will help us go past the language, go past the facade, and get to the content of the things. Other than that, I think we all know attachment, anger, pride. There are some missing in the list that we know: jealousy, greed, fear. Fear is not, fear per se is not. But we can speak of afflicted and non-afflicted fear. Yeah. Oh yeah. Very important to make those distinctions. So that's the reason why I was emphasizing that first stick to this particular system of presentation and then kind of compare, contrast with the other system, not mixed up everything. Because in the West, fear is very often confused. And I very clearly remember, fear is considered an affliction to be gotten rid of. Not just gotten rid of, but to kind of upfront face it, right? Not get rid of it. Not kind of cherish it and nurture it for some time and then do something about it and then get over with it. But sometimes to be confronted right away. Yeah, I remember very clearly there was a discussion with some foreign exchange student. We had discussion and we talked about what about this attitude. And our discussion landed on fear. And I presented my Buddhist perspective and they even backed it up. She wasn't convinced. So when it was time for us to part, she left me a note thanking me for the discussion. But I still believe fear is an affliction. Okay, she went with that. I can totally understand. Yeah. And there was a hand raised also.
So your previous list the ignorance, attachment, and anger is a different order from what you're doing here. Is there a significance on how the afflictions are listed?
Yeah, I noticed it. That was not intentional. That was not intentional. Yeah, you know, I was finalizing the slides maybe an hour before our session last night. So sometimes there are time constraints that keep me from attending to the details. So this was not intentional. Yeah, I would rather prefer ignorance first. Yeah, no, not that ignorance is the first one. If I have the choice, I would put ignorance first and make a sense of it. Otherwise, in the scriptures, it is also it goes in this way order. There may be, as I said, there may be contextually. There may be contextually, particularly in this system of the Abhidhamma, you see attachment listed first, and from a particular perspective, attachment, craving, desire, all lumped together, is presented as having a more prominent role in leading all other afflictions, and this is done purposefully within a particular context. Yeah, so that may be the reason here, but yes.
Can you explain the difference between emotional and cognitive?
Okay.
Because ignorance and doubt don't seem particularly emotional, but yeah, I'm really wondering, what does emotional mean? How can you tell what's emotional?
Yeah, that's very true. You got me. Yeah, I would rather say pride. Pride is even in some categories, even included within the cognitive into a group of 6 with the other 5 views, and then the other 4 are kind of left aside. So, in the case of basically what I'm using, why I'm using this term, basically why I'm using this term, yes. Why I'm using this term or this distinction is not arbitrarily, but looking for a cue in the scripture. There, they consider all the views as to be as all the 5 views as in terms of their substantial nature. Say, if we are talking of afflictions, attitudes, but still we can talk in terms of substance. But their substance not in the sense of concrete objects, materials, but substance in the sense of what they are made of. In terms of mental element, what they are made of. They may take some form, but in terms of their substance, in terms of their mental substance in the form of a mental element, what they are made of, just almost similar at the. I don't know so much about how it will play out in the Prasangika Madhyamika system, but in the Abhidhamma system, which is mostly at the Vaibhasika, Swatantrika, and to a great extent, when they deal with the afflictions and emotions, whatnot, that's something very much carried over to the upper schools also, with slight variations, particularly in the context of ignorance. So what I was going to say is that when they present it, it's very similar to what we speak in physics. Is it in physics? Yeah, very similar to what we speak in physics or in chemistry. Like we have atoms and compounds. Likewise, we speak of emotions and mental events in the form of, almost in the form of atoms and compounds. We may come up with some name and they said it is a compound. When you break it down, it will come down to this atom. So in the case of the view, it says that when you break it down, it is wisdom in nature, except it is a skewed one. So the material it is made of is wisdom. For lack of a better term, I'm using the term wisdom. It is misleading, I understand. But it has to do with something intellect, intelligence, or intelligence, intelligence. Intelligence, although intelligence, I have been told by someone that it is quite misleading, because intelligence is usually something smart and something. But to call these views, which are completely skewed and so engrossed in their grasping, to be called intelligence, it is not smart. Intelligence are smart. This is totally unsmart of them to be doing. So anyway, we get a sense, understanding. So for lack of a better term, I was saying, shut up, wisdom. Shut up, nyomongchen, afflicted wisdom. So by its very nature, it is shut up in nature, but it is skewed. And that's why they are called, that's what I'm using the term cognitive. And that's not what is used in terms of pride and in terms of doubt. In terms of when you break it down, what it comes down to in terms of the mental substance, mental element. But in the case of the pride, the reason why other texts lump it into the view is that it has so much to do with how the self-grasping fits it. Although self-grasping fits other afflictions and whatnot, but not in the way it does with the pride. It's almost like percentage-wise, most of the self-grasping with this sense of elation, of being something higher, more, but its main material is made of self-grasping. So that's the very reason. So outwardly, it may look like doubt and pride may align more to the cognitive nature, but from a Buddhist perspective, the very substance they are made of is not the wisdom. And we don't have much time. Did you have a question, Anna? Okay. So then we will not dwell much on these afflictions. I assume that we all understand, we all recognize them. Yeah, sometimes there may be differences there, and which is there in the case of ignorance. And yeah, let's look at the views. Yeah, in terms of the views, I will again not go much into detail of this, except saying that these are cognitive in nature. I was first calling it intelligence in nature. I got corrected by someone with reason. I changed it into cognitive. Now I'm getting suggestions saying, let's revert it back into intelligence. So anyway, you got the idea. It is by its very mental substance, shut up in nature, shut up or wisdom in nature, but skewed one. Yeah, shut up wisdom. As I said, this is not a good translation for shut up, but usually we call wisdom wherever shut up happens. Particularly when we speak of method and wisdom, it's the same term, tap tang shut up. But shut up by its very nature is not positive. It is included in the so-called Yungenga, not the five omnipresent, but the second group of five, called those with definite objects. Yeah, it's pardon? Yes, object ascertaining factors. Yeah, object ascertaining factors. They are very true. They are very what do you call it? Is there any words like choosy? Yeah. Is there? Or picky? Oh yeah, picky, choosy. Yeah, they are picky. They are picky in what object they cling onto. That's why they are called object ascertaining. Their object is particular. So there's a group called this one. So we're not going into other mental factors since this is on emotion, afflictions, and we're focusing on that. But right now we're kind of digressing a little bit for purpose. So these are all views in nature, or rather afflicted views in nature. The first one is the most important one. That's what we usually are calling self-grasping. But self-grasping is more general. Self-grasping is like a big category within which the view of personal identity is a subset of it, or the most important part of it. We will not go into much detail about that unless people want it, and we have questions from people. So the others are also, since you will have the slides and also some read other materials, you can know this. So the view of personal identity is this this exaggerated sense of I and mine. From a an exaggerated sense of I and mine, where we kind of identify ourselves with the five aggregates, either a collection of it or a singular individual part of it, where there is this what do you call correlation between the object of a designation and the designated one, if we speak from a Prasangika point of view. Yeah, if you speak from a Prasangika point of view, it's a view that pertains to how we see ourselves in relation to the aggregates. And in this skewed way, we see ourselves as identifiable with any of the aggregates or the collection of it. So basically, this correlation of object of designation with the basis of designation, not being able to tease the two apart. So it's what it says, seeing the five aggregates as I or mine. And then the others are all generated on that basis. On that basis of how I am this totally unfounded I in relation to its aggregates, almost to the point of being findable objectively out there within the aggregates, either as collection of them, as a continuum of them, or as any individual aggregates, not being able to separate the designated object from the basis of designation. This is a very crucial aspect of understanding selflessness. So the second one, extreme view, is seeing such a person, such an inflated person, as being either eternal or going to be annihilated upon death. Again, either way is skewed. It's neither eternal, right? Eternal in that particular format of being, as permanent, as identifiable with aggregates, nor is it something that ceases upon death. Both of them involve extreme view. And then the third, fourth are, of course, generated by intelligence or thoughtful analysis, but landing on seeing something wrong as a supreme one, as an unmistaken view. So we could come up, when we say view, just as in English it suggests, view is almost like a perspective, outlook, what things are. and getting it wrong in whatever form it may be. And that's not only getting wrong, but it's kind of completely blinded by it, so much so that one holds it to be supreme, unmistaken, unshakable, unfailing, like that. And so goes with the same with practice. There could be a certain practice, certain ritual, certain rite, you kind of so totally, though it is limited in what it can do, but not, but kind of totally believing and giving and devoting all of this time, investing all this energy into just spending time in doing it, and thus defeating the whole purpose of getting somewhere, whereas one doesn't go anywhere, and all of these efforts are fruitless. The last one is called wrong view, where it mostly takes the form of negation, saying yes, there is no cause and effect, saying that there is no, saying that there is no cause and effect, there is no actor and action, anything existing. If you kind of fall into this belief that it totally doesn't exist, you totally deny that kind of a, particularly with respect to things that would have a big impact in how one lives one's life and relate to others, particularly in terms of how one relates to our own mental capacities. So any particular wrong view taking the form of negation, rejection, which would have such a severe impact on how one relates with others, particularly in terms of one's attitude and perspective. Those are included in the wrong views. So those are 10 root afflictions. Now it will be interesting to see the relationship between the root and the secondary ones that we didn't look last time. We look in detail about it and make some sense from that. Yes. Let me see what the next slide is. Just have a peek. Okay, that's interesting. Exactly, we come to that point. We didn't go to that last time. Okay, so in the afternoon we'll deal with that. Yes, please.
Can you explain the fifth one, the wrong view that denies the existence of cause and effect, with the 10th, the karma, the mental karma of ignorance?
It's the same.
So that one is both a karma and an affliction.
I see. You got me. You got me. I would have to think. Yeah, I would have to think. I have to come with more emanation next time. But thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, you saw me just falling into saying it's the same. Oh, yeah. Okay. But I still stand my ground, as I said last time. I'll figure out why this is included in it. Thank you. And that's how we learn, and how I learn. Thank you. Yes, please. There's a question there. This will be our last question for this session.
In number 2, talking about the extreme view and saying that the view of the annihilation of personal identity is an extreme view that would prevent liberation. So is that to mean that if you don't have faith in reincarnation, that that's it for you? That deals you out of liberation. Is that the way to understand that?
Yeah, from a Buddhist perspective, from a Buddhist bias. But at the same time, it makes sense. If you don't believe in it, you would have no interest whatsoever of anything after that. And you wouldn't make any effort, because in anything that you don't believe, you wouldn't put in any effort. So efforts will be just short limited, short term. And how would you expect liberation from this affliction, which is built so deeply entrenched in us? It's common sense, I think.
Well, it doesn't appear as common sense to some of us, but just wondering, I had a conversation with Venerable Shodran yesterday, and I mentioned that I, had some, I didn't have credence for reincarnation at this point. I didn't have.
Yeah, that's.
And so she said, well, there was some scientific studies that came out of a certain university, and she couldn't remember what they were.
Yeah.
And she said, I should ask you what was the reference for those scientific studies, or where were they done, so I could look further into it.
But at the same time, I would suggest that at least be open to it. Even the scientists, the top-notch scientists, at least when it comes to this topic, they would at the best say, I don't know. That's the truth. And we could be as much siding with them. And in such cases, it's far better to at least give the benefit of the doubt. That would be a smart way of doing it. So that means not totally denying it. At least saying this is possible. And that's the best way to go. And that's exactly we do when it comes to our one life, this life situations. The whole company, the whole enterprise of insurance is built on that. And we pay so much money into insurance. And why not do this? Here, the good thing is we got to be our own insurance company by investing merits, by engaging in merits, and at least allow that this could happen. This could be possible, in which case I'm prepared. Deposit the merits and you run your own insurance company. So at the very least, people, because those who say outrightly said it doesn't exist at all, it is just a whim with no really sound reasoning for that. At the very most, they could say, I don't see it. But not seeing is not enough to say something is not existence. There's a big difference between not seeing and denying it. Not seeing something exists and seeing something as not existent. So it would be very smart of us to allow for that, and at least on the sidelines, do something to invest in it. Look at this life, how we are. Just look at this life and how come we started out this way, which has all these potentials to lead us to this stage, to all these baggages within us in terms of afflictions, habits and whatnot, so distinct from others. Where would this have come from? So at least these are all pointing to some possibility, and be open to that. And that would be a smart way of doing it. I would think like that. And even for the Buddhists also, most of us, including myself, cannot kind of surely say that, yes, I have this experience. But with my all openness, I kind of lean more towards that, because I begin to see signs of its possibility. There's, in terms of episodes, there are so many of them, not just East, West, but everywhere, of very out-of-body experiences, happenings, whatnot. But even looking into our own being without any experience of, in terms of our mental capacity, potential, whatnot, what our tendencies are, dispositions are, we need to ask, particularly look at afflictions, how ripe they are, how different we are, in what way we are strong. How in the world did we come to that? It is so difficult to explain. Even identical twins differ in them. It's not just genetics. So scientists at the best call them epigenetics. Since they do not think beyond life, they have to kind of sort out something and then said, yes, not just genetics, epigenetics, it's environment and genetics. But the question is, how in the world you ended up in this environment at this time? Why? Why not other times? In this family, if we explain, if we probe like this, then it points more to the possibility of a life before and after, other than not. So these are ways to deal with it. Okay, I think we'll stop here. Yeah, I welcome these questions. That's very good. But that's how we all grow and learn, and we have no reason to be to be deceptive, to be untruthful. We have to be open and discuss things. Because after all, we would individuals have to face this. And that's how we would progress on the path. Yeah. Okay.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and those spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Wholesome's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niyatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forever.